Thank you, Sumit. Thank you for organizing such a wonderful course, and I congratulate all the previous speakers for their very nice talks, and I'll try to live up. I'm talking about primary intraocular lymphoma, which is a subtype of central nervous system lymphoma. So we should know that it is not alone. It always comes with a big baggage that is primary central nervous system lymphoma. And when it is confined to the eye, it is also called primary vitreoretinal lymphoma. So these are synonymously used. In the eye, it typically involves various structures such as subretinal pigment epithelium, retina, vitreous, and optic nerve. So what goes unnoticed is the optic nerve involvement. Unless you do an MRI with contrast, you may not be able to pick up optic nerve sheath involvement. And it is a diffuse large B cell lymphoma and rarely a T cell lymphoma. Whereas we have to differentiate it from secondary intraocular lymphoma, which involves the choroid, which looks like this. It's a masked unilateral or bilateral, which may look like choroidal metastasis that was shown earlier. It can be unilateral or bilateral multifocal. So this is choroidal lymphoma, which is a secondary form of lymphoma, whereas primary CNS lymphoma looks different. How common is it? It is, as a brain tumor, it is quite common. It forms about 4 to 6%, at least in the Western literature, of primary brain tumors. And among extranodal lymphoma, it is less than 2%. It has shown increasing incidence in the recent times, possibly because of immunocompromised individuals, and the number of patients have multiplied by 3 over the last 3 decades. Generally occurs in 3 to 8 decades of life. Most common age group is 50 to 60, and it occurs in younger individual if they're immunocompromised. Now, etiologies are infective etiology, which is mediated by Epstein-Barr virus, Toxoplasma gondii, and infection-driven B-cell clonal expansion, that is a theory. Inflammatory, it is driven by chemokine hypothesis. Chemokines are nothing but small protein molecules which attract or recruit lymphocytes. And when the lymphocytes go out of control and have a clonal proliferation, that results in a tumor, and association with immunocompromised status I already mentioned. Now, this association is important to realize. 15 to 30% of primary intraocular lymphoma have concurrent primary CNS lymphoma at the same time. So it's mandatory that we screen the CNS very carefully at the primary onset itself. 15 to 30% of primary CNS lymphoma have concurrent primary intraocular lymphoma. So if a patient goes to a neurologist or an oncologist, they necessarily should have the eye screened. Now, most important aspect here is that
ওটা নিয়ে আমাকে ফোন করেছিল একজন ওখানে গেস্ট স্পিকার আছে তো আমি তার ব্যাপারে কিছু
in 30 to 10 to 30 months. So this is very important to note, which means that these patients, after having intraocular lymphoma managed, we have to screen them for a very long time, even up to 5 to 7 years, with periodic MRI scans, so that the CNS lymphoma, which is life-threatening, does not go missed. Now, ocular symptoms are blurred vision. These patients have symptomatology which is not very uncommon. Most of the patients come to us with blurred vision, which may be minimal. They might have just lost a line or two of vision, accompanied by floaters, which is also not very uncommon. So these patients have very, very common symptoms, which may often get brushed aside. They don't have dramatic symptoms of loss of vision, dramatic symptoms such as red eye or painful eye. And CNS symptoms are also very mild. So to say forgetfulness, headache, unless they are very severe forms of affection when you have hemiparesis, ataxia, and seizures. This is one of the manifestations. This is not very common, but anterior segment involvement with the form of a white eye hypopyon, whereas there are no signs of uveitis, no synechia, etc. There could be a small little membrane over the lens, but apart from that, it is an absolutely white eye, white hypopyon. That's one of the manifestations. When you look at the fundus, it might look exactly like vitritis, like this, a haze. Haze when there is diffuse ground glass appearance of the vitreous, through which you can vaguely see the disc, and rest of the retina background is very, very vaguely seen. Whereas cloud is when there are clear areas, when, through the clear areas, you can actually see some of the normal retina, and here you see the fovea, and you see the optic nerve very hazily. This is one more example of a cloud. So it's either a haze or a cloud or a clump. And these are clumps of cells which look like vitreous and retinoblastoma, beyond which you see normal retina. Then when you look at the retina, when the retina is seen clearly, you find RP and sub-RP infiltrates, which are multinodular, and some of these nodules may coalesce together to find larger nodules. They may look like very discrete nodules. Since it's a chronic condition, you find RP atrophy, which indicates that there was some subretinal fluid earlier, which is shrunken down. Now, most important diagnostic tool is non-interventional, that is autofluorescence. And lesions which are above the RPE are typically hyperautofluorescent, whereas lesions which are below the RPE are typically hypoautofluorescent. And when you do fundus fluorescein angiography, you find that there is reversal. What appeared hyperfluorescent on autofluorescence becomes hypofluorescent, and this is typically called a leopard spot pattern. And OCT is quite diagnostic. You find nodular, discrete, or coalescent nodular excrescences, which have a typical feature. These are, as we already mentioned, these are at the level of retinal pigment epithelium, above it or below it, or on both the sides of it. Separation of Bruch's membrane from the retinal pigment epithelium with partial destruction of retinal pigment epithelium, disruption of photoreceptor and ISOS junction line, and multiple hyperreflective signals in the inner retina. This is the typical OCT appearance that has been described. When you do an MRI, you find meningeal enhancement as the first MRI sign. If the optic nerve is involved, the optic nerve sheath enhances. And this is, if it's advanced disease, you find T1 hypointense, T2 hypo or isointense, vivid homogeneous enhancing lesions with restricted diffusion if you do diffusion weighted images, and a high Collins peak if you do spectrometry, MR spectrometry. Masquerades, vitritis, infective uveitis, endophthalmitis, metastasis, and optic neuritis. If it's optic nerve involvement, in fact, it does look like optic neuritis. And the diagnosis is mainly based on clinical appearance and autofluorescence, OCT, etc. MRI is very important, followed by a PET scan for systemic screening. Then you do biopsy. These are the diagnostic yields of various biopsies, which is FNAC, vitrectomy, subretinal material. But most important biopsy technique that we employed is a vitrectomy. But if you do vitrectomy, you have to make sure that there is no use of systemic steroids for at least for 3 weeks. You have to give a washout period. If the patient has vitritis simulation, then he might have been given steroids by the primary physician, and that has to be taken into consideration. Now, what are the measures to increase diagnostic yield? This is just the summation of the literature. I keep it very simple: 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And these are the various techniques. So basically, if you do a vitrectomy, you have to make sure that cell block is prepared, which gives you a 50% diagnostic yield. And on the same material, if you do flow cytometry, that increases the diagnostic yield. If you do PCR gene rearrangement, then you get the highest diagnostic yield. So you do a good vitrectomy, core vitrectomy, then do a cell block, and then do immunohistochemistry, and then do a PCR. Let's skip that flow chart. I don't have time for that. For the management guidelines, again, keeping very simple. Of course, it's very intricate disease, but if you want to keep it very simple, if it's unilateral, intravitreal methotrexate or rituximab, or external beam radiation, if it is bilateral primary intraocular lymphoma without CNS lymphoma, then external beam radiation may be preferred because bilateral vitreous injections slightly cumbersome. You cannot give both injections on the same day. If it is PIOL with CNS lymphoma concurrently, then you give chemotherapy, which is mandated. Then EBRT to the eye with brain and spine has to be included in radiation field, and intrathecal methotrexate and rituximab. On the eye, you can, of course, give intravitreal injection. These are the 3 protocols of intravitreal injection. Methotrexate classically described as 25 injection, which becomes a little too much. So we use what is called a minimal dose methotrexate approach, where we give weekly injections until complete clinical resolution +1. If it is both eye involvement, then we alternate between the right eye and the left eye. Rituximab is a slightly spaced out injection, 3 weekly, 1 milligram in 0.1 ml. And stability is an acceptable endpoint. If the lesion reduces and reaches a phase of stability where it does not reduce any further, that is an acceptable endpoint. This is one of the patients who was treated with intravitreal injection and external beam radiation. So one more patient treated with intravitreal injection. So prognosis, ocular remission seen in 70 to 90% of patients after the intravitreal injection. 10 to 80% die within 12 to 36 months. So it's not a good disease to have. Large series have shown relapse at 18 months. So this is the time to watch out for. 18 months, they relapse typically in the eye and CNS, and overall survival is about 30 months. But what is encouraging is that combined treatment, that is when you do chemotherapy, intraocular injection and radiation, pushes the survival to at least 36 months. Whereas if you do just EBRT or chemotherapy alone, one of those, then you have the survival. But ocular remission has no bearing on survival. So ocular remission should not be taken very, very seriously and pumped with intravitreal injections. You can have an endpoint where you can stop giving intravitreal injection because it has absolutely no bearing on survival at all. So in conclusion, I would say that primary intraocular lymphoma masquerades as vitritis. In fact, that's the most common masquerade which delays the diagnosis. It happens in immunocompromised individuals who have early and aggressive manifestation. Most important to remember is its association with CNS lymphoma, which has to be tracked beyond ocular remission for several years so that you can pick up this lethal disease. Vitreous biopsy is very important, and you have to know how to process it readily without delay in processing. EBRT with a combination of chemotherapy, intraocular and systemics definitely helps push the survival. Thank you so much.